Welcome to Story Planet. We bring you a story that walks, not runs. A tale where rain falls like music, and love arrives like a quiet cup of tea left waiting. It's a story of soft glances, shared silences, and one umbrella wide enough for two hearts. So breathe in slow, let the world grow still, and drift gently into one umbrella, two hearts. It rained often in Hazel's little town, not the kind of rain that frightened the skies, but the kind that whispered softly on window panes and kissed the ground like it was saying hello. The town itself was small enough for everyone to know each other's faces, but large enough for some stories to go untold. Hazel lived in a narrow house just above her umbrella shop, a gentle building with creaky wooden steps, flower pots with names, and a tiny porch where wind chimes sang to no one in particular. Her life was simple, quiet, rhythmic like the rain. Every morning, she opened the shop, lit a little lavender candle near the cash counter, turned the sign on the door to say, "Come in," and brewed her first cup of rose tea. And every evening, whether the sky cried or smiled, she'd place one open umbrella outside the door before locking up, not to sell it, not to make a point, just to leave something open in a world that often closes too fast. That umbrella, soft gray with tiny white dots, had stayed by her door for years. She never quite remembered when it started, but it felt right. It was on one such quiet afternoon, when clouds began their usual slow parade, and Hazel, returning from the bakery, held a loaf wrapped in brown paper, that she saw him. He was standing near the post box under a drooping maple tree. No umbrella, no raincoat, just still. He looked new, not lost exactly, but like someone who hadn't decided where he belonged. Hazel paused. She didn't speak at first, just walked toward him, her umbrella large and light in her hand. As she reached him, she tilted the canopy slightly. "It's wide enough for two," she said softly, "if you don't mind walking slowly." He turned, surprised by her voice, but not startled. His eyes were kind, with that quiet look people get when they've been listening to too much silence. He nodded, stepped in gently, and together, without introducing themselves, they walked. The rain fell like whispers, not rushing them, not hiding them. Hazel walked on the left, the umbrella tilting just a little toward him. He walked with his hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. Neither spoke. Not for lack of words, but because the silence between them felt just right. They passed the library, the florist, the empty tea stall that only opened on market days. Each step felt familiar, though they'd never walked together before. At the corner of Pine and West, he stopped. "This is me," he said simply. Hazel nodded. "Then I suppose this is where the umbrella stops too." He smiled, a small one that stayed in the corners of his mouth. "Thank you," he said, stepping out into the drizzle. "I think I needed the walk more than the umbrella." She watched him unlock the small blue gate, watched until he turned the knob and disappeared inside. And then she walked home, with only half the umbrella above her now. That night, as she lit the warm lamp by her bedside, She glanced at the row of mugs on her kitchen shelf. She had always kept one, always just one. But now, without really thinking, she took down another. It didn't feel like a decision, just a pause in the quiet, a breath, waiting to be shared. And somewhere, in the sky above the town, the clouds rumbled like they too were holding something soft in their chest. The next day was dry, and the umbrella still stood outside Hazel's shop, open as always, waiting, not for the rain, but maybe, just maybe, for a return. It rained again 2 days later, as if the sky had remembered something and opened its arms once more. Hazel stood behind the counter of her little shop, wrapping a journal in brown paper, the scent of tea and damp wood curling softly through the air. The bell above the door tinkled, light as breath, and she looked up. There he was, Leo, with rain on his shoulders and something unreadable in his eyes. He nodded, not a grand gesture, just enough to say, "Hello again, if that's all right." Hazel offered a smile, just the corner of her mouth curling like a question mark made of kindness. "Still rating," she said softly. "I noticed," Leo replied, his voice like brushed velvet. He wandered toward the shelves, pausing at the display of journals, fingers trailing gently across the covers, as if they held secrets he had once known. He picked up a deep green one and turned it in his hand. "I used to write," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Then life got too loud, or maybe I just stopped listening." Hazel didn't answer, but her eyes said she understood. He placed the journal on the counter, and for a moment they simply stood there, in the hush. Then she poured a second cup of tea, without asking. They sat near the window. The world outside, painted in watercolors. The rain tapped gently on the glass, like it was part of the conversation. Leo held the cup with both hands, as if warming more than just his fingers. "This place feels slower," he said. "People back home talk like they're running out of time. Here, it feels like time just sits down and rests a while." Hazel smiled. "That's why I stayed. Thanks again." And in that glance, something settled, like a leaf finding the surface of a pond. In that, the days that followed were a quiet rhythm, like pages turning in a well-loved book. Leo returned often, sometimes buying a journal, sometimes not. Sometimes he spoke, other times he didn't. But Hazel always poured 2 cups, always lit the lavender candle, always left the umbrella outside the door. One evening, as the light dimmed early and the rain came with a gentler hush, Leo arrived with a small paper bag. "I baked," he said, a little awkwardly. "Oat cookies. Not sure if they're edible, but they're warm." Hazel took one, broke it in half, and handed him the other piece without a word. They sat, nibbling slowly, the silence between them not needing to be filled. "Do you always light a candle?" he asked after a while. She nodded. "It's my way of saying you're welcome here, even when no one's looking." Leo's eyes softened. "Then you've been welcoming me since the beginning, haven't you?" Hazel's smile was quiet, but deep. One afternoon it didn't rain. The sky was pale blue, with cotton-soft clouds drifting lazily. But Leo came anyway. No coat, no bag, just him. He sat at the usual spot, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the green journal he had bought days ago. "Would it bother you," he asked, "if I wrote here sometimes?" Hazel shook her head. "Only if you didn't." And so he began, pen moving slowly, pauses between words as natural as breath. Some days he wrote poems, other days just thoughts, but always in the presence of the soft lamp, the tea, the candle's steady flame. Hazel never read over his shoulder, but sometimes he read aloud, only little things. One day he read, "There's a chair by a window, and a woman with a quiet voice. I think she's teaching me how to listen again." Hazel didn't speak after that, just reached for the teapot and poured a little more warmth into his cup. As the week slipped by, people in town began to notice, not in a loud way, but in the way people notice when a rhythm changes. They saw 2 cups instead of 1, an extra chair by the window, a deeper smile in Hazel's eyes, and sometimes the sound of low laughter, drifting out into the rainy street like music made just for 2. Still, nothing was ever rushed. Leo came and went with the rain, with the wind, with the gentle turn of days. Hazel stayed steady, like the flame on her candle, always soft, always warm, and the umbrella outside her shop remained open, not for the rain anymore, but for the memory of the first walk, and for all the walks yet to come. The sky that evening turned golden pink, and Hazel watched it with her hands wrapped around a warm mug. Leo sat beside her, writing, the tip of his pen barely touching the paper, like he didn't want to disturb the peace. He paused, looked at her, and said softly, "You know, I never thought quiet could feel like company, but here, with you, it's the loudest kind of comfort." Hazel didn't need to answer. She just reached across the table and laid her hand beside his, not touching, not forcing, just waiting, and in a few slow heartbeats, his hand found hers, gently, naturally, like rain meeting leaves. And there, in the hush of their small shop, with the world outside breathing slow and steady, 2 hearts continued their quiet conversation under a roof that smelled of paper and tea, and a sky that would always remember the day she shared her umbrella. The rain didn't come that morning, nor the next after that. The skies above Hazel's town turned a soft, unbroken blue. Clouds wandered like lazy boats, and the streets shimmered with golden light. It should have felt like a blessing, but to Hazel, it felt like something was missing. She still opened the shop, still lit the lavender candle, still placed the same umbrella by the door, even though the sun danced freely on the cobblestones. The umbrella looked almost out of place, like a memory standing in a world that had moved on. But Hazel knew better. Memories don't move on. They wait, they breathe, and somewhere her heart was waiting too. 4 days of dry skies, and Leo didn't come. No footsteps, no gentle knock on the glass, no fingers grazing journal spines. Hazel told herself he might be busy, or tired, or simply enjoying the sunlight. But the second cup of tea still sat warm each afternoon, untouched, and her eyes kept lifting, quietly, every time the doorbell didn't ring. She missed his stillness, missed how his presence didn't fill the room, but softened it. She missed the sound of pen on paper, and the way he'd sometimes hum under his breath. Not quite a tune, just a thread of peace. On the 5th morning, Hazel opened the shop slower. Her fingers lingered on the "come in" sign. She stood there a while, holding the silence like a fragile cup, unsure what to pour into it. But just as she turned to step back inside, she noticed something. A folded note, tucked neatly beneath the umbrella's curved handle. Her breath caught, as if the sky had held it for her. She knelt, opened it with care, and read, "I didn't come because of the rain. I stayed because of you." She didn't need a name on the note. She knew the curve of that handwriting, like knowing the shape of your own breath in the cold. And when she looked up, across the street, there he was, Leo, standing by the lamppost with a gentle smile, holding a new umbrella, deep green with soft embroidery along the edge. Her name stitched in one corner and his in the other. She stepped outside without a word, met him halfway, and he held it up without asking. Together, beneath the bright sky, they stood, under an umbrella that didn't need clouds to open. That afternoon, the shop felt different. Not because anything had changed, but because everything had settled. Leo stayed longer than usual. They didn't talk about the note, or the days apart. They simply moved around each other like they always had. Quiet, gentle, familiar. Hazel rearranged some journals. Leo swept the front step. They shared a lunch of warm bread and blueberry jam, fingers brushing now and then, eyes meeting, but not rushing. Every silence was a sentence in a language only they spoke. Later, as dusk wrapped the sky in lavender and gold, they sat by the window again. Hazel leaned her head softly against the glass, her fingers playing with the rim of her cup. "I used to think love had to be loud," she whispered, "like fireworks or thunder." Leo looked at her, his voice low, steady. "Turns out, love can be the quietest thing in the room, and still change everything." She turned to him then, really turned, and something warm passed between them. Not sparks, but something slower, deeper, like roots finding water. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't wait. Their fingers laced like pages being turned together. The town noticed again, not because they were loud, but because joy makes even silence glow. 2 months always on the shelf. Fresh flowers in a new vase by the window, and Hazel's smile just a touch softer, like someone who had finally exhaled after years of holding breath. Leo still wrote in his journal, but now the entries ended with her name, sometimes just an initial, sometimes a full line. Today was made of tea, paper, and Hazel. He read that one aloud, and Hazel closed her eyes, letting the words settle like sunlight on her skin. That night, as they locked the shop together, Hazel placed her old umbrella beside the door as always. But now, beside it, stood another, deep green, with names stitched like a promise. And the sky above them was clear, not a cloud in sight. Still, they opened it anyway, because sometimes love needs no reason to unfold. Just two hearts, brave enough to meet in the middle and stay. The seasons shifted, as they always do, with a kind of hush that only those who listen carefully can hear. The rain no longer dictated Hazel's days, nor Leo's visits. Some afternoons were bright, some cloudy, But the umbrella outside Hazel's shop remained open every single day. Not for the weather anymore, but for the story it carried and the hearts it had brought together. Oh no. Leo's journal now sat permanently by the window seat, its pages slowly filling with thoughts, poetry, memories that smelled like warm bread and rose tea. Hazel didn't need to read them. She lived them, each line unfolding softly in the rhythm of their days. Their love never rushed, never declared itself loudly. It arrived in tiny gestures, in the pouring of tea, in the way she folded his scarf before he left, in the way he always left his chair just a little askew, so she'd know he planned to return. One morning, as spring began to hum quietly through the trees, Hazel stood on her porch, barefoot, her hair loose around her shoulders, watching the light spill into her shop's windows. Leo joined her silently, his hand finding hers without question. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The quiet was full, like pages filled with unspoken love. "I've never belonged anywhere quite like this," he said at last, his voice a slow echo in the morning light. Hazel looked at him. "It's not the place," she whispered. "It's the people we find in the quiet corners." That summer, Leo brought home an old bookshelf from the antique store across town. Together, they filled it with journals, some blank, some brimming with years. It stood proudly in the corner of the shop, with a tiny wooden sign that read, "Shared pages." Visitors were invited to read, or write, or simply sit near it in stillness. And in time, their little shop became more than a store. It became a place where people came to feel seen, to feel heard, to sip tea with someone or no one at all. Hazel and Leo never made a grand announcement, never told the world they were in love. They simply lived it. In every cup poured, in every story shared, in every umbrella offered when skies grew dark. And then came a day, many moons later, when the clouds rolled in soft and slow, like an old friend returning. Hazel looked out the window and smiled. "It's raining," she said quietly. Leo stood beside her, the same umbrella from their first walk now resting in his hand, worn but still strong. "Shall we take the long way home?" he asked. She nodded, slipping her hand into his, and out they stepped into the soft drizzle. Walking slowly, the umbrella tilting just enough to cover them both. As they passed through their town, the florist, the tea stall, the old library, people looked up and smiled. Not because it was romantic, but because it was real and gentle and lasting. When they reached their doorstep, Hazel paused. "Do you think we'll still walk like this when we're old and gray?" she asked, a twinkle in her eyes. Leo leaned down, kissed the side of her head. "Only if you still carry the umbrella, and I still carry the tea." They laughed softly, their shoulders touching, their hearts still speaking in quiet harmony. And that night, as the rain danced on the roof above, and the wind curled through the trees like a lullaby, Hazel placed both umbrellas by the door, side by side, their handles resting against each other like two palms meeting in prayer. She lit the candle, poured 2 cups of tea, and joined Leo by the window. They didn't say much, They didn't need to. Outside, the rain fell like pages turning, slow and steady and full of story. And somewhere, in the soft heart of their home, love sat quietly between them, warm and forever unfolding. The umbrella stayed open, and so did they. Thank you for listening. If you felt the love in the rain and the warmth between the words, consider liking the story. And if not already, we'd be honored if you subscribe. Share it with someone you hold close, someone who might need a quiet kind of love tonight. Good night and sweet dreams from Story Planet.